The sun beat down on Dustridge like a punishment. It was the kind of heat that made dogs stop barking and old men retreat to shade, the kind that turned the main street into shimmering waves of dust and regret. The town wasn't much, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of civilization, populated by people who'd either run from something or had nowhere else to run to. Clara Whitlock stood on the platform and felt every eye on her. She'd stopped sweating an hour ago. Her mouth was dry as chalk, her dress stuck to her back, and her hands, tied loosely in front of her, more for show than restraint, had gone numb from clenching. 23 years old and already measured, weighed, and found wanting by every standard that mattered out here. "Do I hear $5? Her father's voice cracked on the word five. Thomas Whitlock swayed slightly, bourbon brave and desperate. $5 for a hard-working woman. She cooks, she cleans, she don't breed, someone called from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Not cruel laughter, exactly. Dustridge was too tired for cruelty, but the kind of low, knowing chuckle that said everybody already understood the punchline. Clara's jaw tightened. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, past the cluster of men in their dusty hats and women in their faded calico, past the saloon and the general store and the church with its crooked steeple. Somewhere out there was something better than this. Had to be. $4 then. Her father's voice dropped. He wouldn't look at her. Hadn't looked at her properly in months, not since the doctor confirmed what the whole town had been whispering. $4 is a fair price for what, Tom? That was Bradley Stevens, who owned the feed store. He stood with his arms crossed, looking more bored than interested. For a widow who couldn't give your son-in-law a single child in 3 years of marriage? That's not a wife, Tom. That's a burden. Her father flinched. She's a good girl. She needs a miracle, another voice cut in. And miracles don't come cheap. Clara had learned to build walls inside herself. She'd started construction the day Daniel died, thrown from his horse on a routine ride to check fence lines, and she'd been adding bricks ever since. When the doctor told her the problem wasn't Daniel, it was her. When Daniel's mother suggested she'd somehow failed her son. When her own father started drinking away the shame of having a defective daughter. But standing here listening to men discuss her like damaged goods, she felt those walls cracking. $3. Her father's voice was barely audible now. Come on, boys, $3. Silence. The wind kicked up a small dust devil in the street. A baby cried somewhere. A horse stamped and snorted at the hitching post. Clara counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. $2, her father whispered. $2, and she's yours. I'll throw in her mother's cookware, the good cast iron. Jesus Christ, Tom. That was Sheriff Porter, shaking his head. Have some dignity. But dignity was a luxury Thomas Whitlock had sold off months ago, shot by shot at Hannigan's saloon. Dignity didn't keep the bank from circling his property like a vulture. Dignity didn't put food on a table or silence the whispers that his daughter had cursed the family line. Clara watched her father's shoulders slump. In the harsh sunlight, she could see every line etched into his face, every broken blood vessel, every mark of defeat. Once upon a time, Thomas Whitlock had been a proud man, a respected rancher, a father who'd taught her to ride and shoot and read from the one book they owned. Now he was this. $1. The words fell into the dusty air like stones into a well. The crowd stirred. A few people turned to see who'd spoken, but Clara kept her eyes forward. She didn't want to know. Didn't want to see which man had decided she was worth less than a bottle of whiskey. $1, the voice repeated. It was rough, worn smooth at the edges like a river stone. I'll give you $1, Tom. Elias? Her father squinted into the crowd. Elias Vance? Clara's head turned despite herself. The man who stepped forward didn't look like salvation. He looked like 30-some years of hard living, tall and lean in the way of men who forgot to eat regular meals. His shirt had been mended several times, his hat had seen better decades, and his face looked like hers felt. Empty. Hollowed out. Going through motions because stopping meant facing things he wasn't ready to face. $1, Elias Vance said again, pulling a silver coin from his pocket. He didn't look at Clara. Didn't look at anyone, really. Just held the coin between his thumb and forefinger, letting it catch the light. That's my offer. Now, Elias, that's... Bradley Stevens started. That's the offer, Elias cut him off. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but something in it made Bradley's jaw snap shut. Tom asked for bids. That's my bid. Sheriff Porter stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt in that casual way lawmen had. Elias, you sure about this? You got 5 kids at home and a ranch that's barely... I know what I got. Elias finally looked up, and Clara saw his eyes. They were the color of winter sky, pale and distant. Question is whether Tom's willing to take an honest offer or keep hawking his daughter like a broke-down mule. The words should have stung, but they didn't. There was no mockery in them, no cruelty, just flat statement of fact, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. Her father's hand trembled as he reached for the coin. $1. That's what I said. For my daughter. For the woman on that platform. Elias pressed the coin into Thomas's palm. We done here? The crowd had gone quiet in a different way now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something harder to name. Shame, maybe, or recognition. The kind of silence that said everybody knew they were watching something break that couldn't be fixed. Thomas Whitlock looked at the silver dollar in his hand, looked at his daughter, looked away. We're done, he whispered. Clara felt something inside her chest crack clean through. Not her heart, that had already broken and badly healed too many times. Something deeper. Some last tether to the idea that she mattered, that she had value, that somewhere in this world was a place for her. $1. She was worth $1. Elias Vance climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Up close, she could see the gray threading through his dark hair, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the dirt under his fingernails from work that never ended. He smelled like leather and horses and something else. Loss, maybe, if loss had a smell. Can you walk? His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. Clara's throat worked. She managed a nod. Then walk. He didn't touch her, didn't offer his hand, just turned and headed down the steps, clearly expecting her to follow. For a second, she couldn't move. Her feet seemed nailed to the platform boards. This was it. The moment where her old life ended and whatever came next began, and she had no idea what that next thing was, only that it started with a man who'd valued her at $1 silver. Clara. Elias had stopped at the bottom of the steps. He still wasn't looking at her, but his voice had shifted somehow. You can stand there all day if you want, but the sun's not getting any cooler, and I got work waiting. She moved. 1 step, 2. 3 steps down, and she was off the platform, feet in the dust, unbound and unclaimed, and somehow more lost than she'd ever been. Her father had disappeared. She didn't see him in the crowd, didn't hear his voice. He'd taken his dollar and vanished, and that told her everything she needed to know about what she'd meant to him in the end. Wait here, Elias said, then headed toward a wagon hitched at the end of the street. Clara stood in the dispersing crowd, feeling eyes on her back. Whispers started up like insects after rain. Elias Vance, can you believe it? Those poor children, as if they haven't suffered enough. Maybe she'll be good with them. She's got to be good for something. Clara locked her knees and kept her chin up. She'd learned that much at least. How to stand when standing was all she had left. The wagon creaked as Elias brought it around. It was old, the wood weathered gray, one wheel slightly crooked. In the back were supplies, sacks of flour and beans, a new axe handle, coils of rope. Get in, Elias said. Clara gathered her skirt and climbed onto the bench seat. The wood was hot enough to burn through fabric. She settled herself, hands folded in her lap, and waited. Elias clicked to the horses, a matched pair of chestnuts that had seen better days, and the wagon lurched forward. They rode out of Dustridge in silence. Clara watched the town disappear behind them. The buildings got smaller, the sounds faded, and soon there was nothing but the creak of wagon wheels, the plod of horse hooves, and the vast empty sky pressing down on everything. 5 miles passed. Then 10. The land out here didn't offer much comfort. Scrub brush and dust, the occasional twisted tree, rocks that looked like they'd been thrown by an angry god. In the distance, mountains rose up purple and hazy, close enough to see but too far to matter. You know anything about ranching? Elias asked suddenly. Clara blinked. It was the first thing he'd said since they'd left town. Some. My father had cattle before—" She stopped. Before he drank away the herd and mortgaged the land and ended up selling his daughter for pocket change. Before don't matter, Elias said. I'm asking about now. Can you cook for 7 people? 7? Me and 5 kids. He flicked the reins, encouraging the horses up a slight rise. You met the kids yet? No. Well, he was quiet for a moment. You will. Something in his tone made Clara's stomach tighten. What happened to their mother? Elias's hands went rigid on the reins. For a long moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she died, year ago. Fever took her in 3 days. I'm sorry. Yeah, the word came out flat. So am I. More silence. The sun had started its slow descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful and harsh at the same time, like everything else out here. Why did you bid on me? The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Elias didn't answer right away. He guided the horses around a wash, the wagon tilting precariously before finding level ground again. Saw your father selling you like property, he said finally. Didn't sit right. So you bought me out of pity. Didn't say that. Then what? Look. Elias pulled the horses to a stop. Turned to face her for the first time since they'd left town. Up close, his eyes weren't empty after all. They were full, just full of things he'd locked down so tight they couldn't escape. You want the truth? I got 5 kids who need tending, a house that's falling apart, a ranch that's one bad season from going under. I needed help and you needed out. That's the deal. That's not a deal. That's what it is. He turned back to the horses, clicked them forward again. You want pretty words? I don't have them. You want promises about how things are going to be? I can't give you those either. What I can give you is a roof and food and work to do. You do that work, you got a place. You don't... He shrugged. Well, I figure you'll make that choice when it comes. Clara stared at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way he held himself like a man who'd forgotten how to bend. What about the children? She asked. How should I... They're kids. They need feeding and cleaning and someone who doesn't fall apart when things get hard. Elias's voice roughened. Beyond that, I don't know what to tell you. I've been figuring it out as I go for a year now, and I'm still getting it wrong most days. Honesty. Raw and uncomfortable, but honest. Clara could work with that. Okay, she said quietly. Elias glanced at her. Okay? Okay. She folded her hands tighter in her lap. I'll do the work. He nodded once, and that was that. Terms set. Agreement made. $1 bought and sold. The sun was lower now, throwing long shadows across the land. Clara watched them stretch and twist, dark shapes that looked nothing like the things that cast them. Another hour passed. The landscape began to shift, less dust, more grass. A creek appeared, running low but steady. Trees clustered along its banks, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Then the house came into view. It sat in a shallow valley, a 2-story structure that had probably been impressive once. Now it sagged in the middle, the porch listing to one side, several windows covered with boards instead of glass, outbuildings scattered around it, a barn, a chicken coop, what might have been a smokehouse, all of them showing signs of neglect. But there was a garden. Overgrown and wild, but definitely a garden, with bean poles and what looked like squash vines and stubborn tomato plants refusing to die despite clear abandonment. Someone had loved this place once, loved it enough to plant and tend and nurture. Elias pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the reins, staring at the front door like it might bite him. They're not going to like you, he said quietly. Clara felt her spine straighten. I didn't expect them to. I mean it. They're going to make it hard. I've had hard before. Elias looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in those winter sky eyes. Not warmth exactly, but maybe recognition. One broken thing seeing another. All right then. He climbed down from the wagon. Let's get this over with. Clara followed, her legs shaky after hours of sitting. The ground felt uncertain under her feet, like she'd forgotten how to stand on earth that wasn't moving. The front door opened before they reached it. A boy stood in the doorway. 12, maybe 13, with Elias's dark hair and a face that had learned hardness too young. He wore clothes that didn't quite fit, sleeves too short, and an expression that said he'd already made up his mind about Clara. Pa, the word was flat. Who's this? This is Clara. Elias stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She's going to be helping out around here. We don't need help. Cole, we don't need help. The boy's voice cracked on the last word, betraying the man act he was trying to pull off. We've been doing fine on our own. We haven't been doing fine. Elias's tone went hard. The house is a mess. The garden's dying, and I found Lily trying to cook beans in a pot with a hole in it because nobody's been watching her close enough. We need help, and Clara's here to give it. Another face appeared behind Cole. Younger, maybe 9, with the same dark hair but different eyes. Wild eyes. Angry eyes. You bought a woman? This boy's voice dripped scorn. Like a horse? Ryder, that's enough. Did you? Did you go into town and buy a woman because we're too much trouble? I said that's enough. Elias's voice cracked like a whip. The house went silent. Clara stood very still, watching this family she'd just been dropped into. The angry boy. The defensive older one. And somewhere inside, 3 more children she hadn't met yet. Listen to me. Elias took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. All of you, listen. I know this is strange. I know it's not what you want. But Clara's here, and she's staying, and you're going to treat her with respect. Understood? No one answered. Understood, Elias repeated, harder this time. Yes, sir, Cole muttered. Ryder said nothing, just glared at Clara like she'd personally murdered his favorite dog. Good, Elias put his hat back on. Clara, come inside. Boys, help me unload the wagon. He walked past his sons into the house, leaving Clara on the ground, looking up at 2 children who hated her on sight. Cole at least had the decency to step aside. Ryder didn't. He stayed planted in the doorway, making her walk around him to get inside. She did, keeping her head up and her face blank. The interior of the house hit her like a physical thing. Not the mess, though there was mess, clothes and dishes and general chaos, but the grief. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Every surface held ghosts. Every corner whispered of the woman who used to live here. A woman who'd loved this place, who'd made it a home. A woman Clara could never replace and shouldn't try to. Ma's room was upstairs. Cole had followed her in, his voice carefully neutral now. Second door on the left. Pa sleeps there now. You can have the room at the end of the hall. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Don't thank me. Cole's jaw worked. I'm just telling you where you can go. Doesn't mean you belong there. He left before she could respond, heading back outside to help with the wagon. Clara stood in the middle of the room and slowly turned, taking it all in. The fireplace with ashes spilling out. The table covered in, she counted, 4 days' worth of dishes. The windows filmed with dust. The floor that hadn't seen a proper sweeping in, who knew how long. A small sound made her turn. 3 children stood on the stairs. The smallest 2 were identical. Twins, maybe 5 years old, a boy and a girl with huge eyes and tangled hair. Behind them stood another boy, maybe 7, silent as a shadow. They stared at Clara. Clara stared back. Hello, she said. The twins grabbed hands and bolted up the stairs. The older boy, Silas, she remembered Elias mentioning a Silas, just kept staring. His eyes were different from his brother's, darker, deeper, like he'd seen things no 7-year-old should see. I'm Clara, she tried again. Silas's mouth didn't move, didn't even twitch. He looked at her for another long moment, then turned and followed the twins upstairs. The front door banged open. Elias and his sons came in carrying supplies, dropping them on the table without ceremony. Cole, Ryder, put this stuff away, Elias ordered. Clara, come with me. I'll show you where things are. He led her through the house in quick, efficient movements. Kitchen, pantry, washroom. Upstairs, 5 bedrooms, 3 of them clearly occupied by children, one that held Elias's sparse belongings, and the one at the end of the hall. It was small, plain. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley, empty of everything except dust and fading light. Used to be Sarah's sewing room, Elias said from the doorway. He wouldn't cross the threshold. She made clothes for the kids in here, Curtains, quilts. He stopped, cleared his throat. Anyway, it's yours now. I'll bring up some linens. Thank you. He nodded and left, his boots heavy on the stairs. Clara walked to the window. From here, she could see the whole valley spread out in the dying light. The creek running silver, the mountains going purple, the vast empty sky that went on forever. She could also see her reflection in the glass, a thin woman in a dusty dress, with hair coming loose from its pins and shadows under her eyes. A woman who'd been sold for $1 and dropped into a broken house full of broken people. A woman who had no idea what she was doing. Behind her, the house creaked and settled. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Elias giving orders, the boys responding in sullen monosyllables. Somewhere above, small feet pattered across floorboards. Clara pressed her palm against the window glass. It was still warm from the day's heat. "All right," she whispered to her reflection. "What now?" Her reflection didn't answer, just looked back at her with the same tired, uncertain eyes. Downstairs, a pot clanged. Someone cursed. A child started crying. Clara closed her eyes, took one deep breath, then turned away from the window. Work to do, Elias had said. A roof and food and work. That, at least, she understood. She found her way back downstairs, following the sounds of chaos to the kitchen. Elias stood at the stove, staring at a pot of something that might have been beans once but had burned to the bottom. Cole was trying to slice bread with a knife that had no business being that dull. Ryder sat at the table, arms crossed, radiating hostility. The twins weren't visible, but Clara could hear them crying somewhere. Silas stood in the doorway, silent and watching. "Here." Clara moved past Elias, took the pot off the heat. "This is done for. We'll need to start over." Elias looked at her. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She rolled up her sleeves. "That was the deal. I do the work." For a second, something like relief flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the same flat mask he'd worn all day. "Boys, get out of the kitchen," he said. "Let Clara work." "But I'm hungry," Ryder protested. "You'll eat when it's ready. Out." They left reluctantly, even Cole, though he shot Clara one last look that clearly said she'd better not poison them. Alone in the kitchen, Clara surveyed the damage. The burned pot, the ancient stove, the pantry full of ingredients but no organization, the pile of dishes that reached truly impressive heights. She should have felt overwhelmed, should have wanted to sit down and cry or scream or give up. Instead, she felt something else, something harder to name. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple, clear knowledge that if she didn't do this, nobody would. Clara found a clean pot, started water boiling, and began to cook. Outside, night fell across the valley. The mountains disappeared into shadow. The creek whispered secrets to the darkness. And in a house full of ghosts, a woman worth $1 started fighting for her place. The beans turned out edible. Not good, but edible, and that felt like a small miracle given the state of the kitchen. Clara served them in mismatched bowls. Apparently Sarah Vance had owned a proper set once, but time and careless hands had reduced it to orphaned pieces that didn't match or fit together. She found bread that was only half stale, sliced it thin to hide the worst of it, and put everything on the table while 5 pairs of eyes watched her like she might suddenly sprout horns. "Sit," Elias said. The children sat. Clara remained standing, unsure where she belonged in this arrangement. "You too," Elias nodded at the empty chair. "You cooked it. You eat it." She sat. For a moment, nobody moved. The twins, Jonah and Lily, she'd learned their names by listening to the boys talk, kept their heads down, stealing glances at her between their tangled hair. Silas stared at his bowl like it might contain answers to questions he couldn't ask. Cole and Ryder wore matching expressions of resentment, though Cole at least tried to hide it. Elias picked up his spoon. That seemed to be the signal everyone was waiting for. The children fell on their food with the desperation of people who'd been feeding themselves badly for too long. Nobody spoke. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Clara had grown up in a house where meals meant conversation, even if it was just her father complaining about cattle prices or her mother asking about schoolwork. This silence felt wrong, hollow. "The beans are good," Cole said suddenly. He didn't look at her when he said it, but his voice carried something that might have been gratitude under all that careful neutrality. "They're just beans," Ryder muttered. They're better than what we've been eating, Cole shot back. That's because you can't cook worth a damn. Language, Elias said quietly. Ryder's jaw clenched, but he went back to eating without another word. Lily dropped her spoon. It clattered against the bowl, and the little girl froze, eyes going wide with something that looked like fear. It's all right, Clara said before she could stop herself. It's just a spoon. Lily stared at her. Up close, Clara could see how thin she was, how the dress she wore hung loose on a frame that should have had more meat on it. Both twins looked like strong wind might blow them away. Here, Clara picked up the spoon, wiped it on her napkin, and held it out. Lily didn't take it, just kept staring with those huge dark eyes. Lily, Elias's voice had gone soft in a way Clara hadn't heard before. Take the spoon. The little girl's hand crept across the table. Her fingers brushed Clara's as she took the spoon back, and Clara felt how cold they were despite the warm evening. Thank you, Lily whispered. Her voice was so quiet, Clara almost missed it. You're welcome. Lily ducked her head and went back to eating, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed, though Clara couldn't say exactly what it was. Dinner ended the same way it had begun, in silence. The children scraped their bowls clean, even Ryder, then sat waiting for dismissal. Dishes, Elias said. But that's... Ryder started. Dishes. All of you. Clara cooked. You clean. That's not fair. Life's not fair. Elias stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You'd have figured that out by now if you'd been paying attention. Get it done. He left the kitchen, his boots heavy on the stairs. A door closed somewhere above. The children looked at each other, then at Clara, then at the pile of dishes that had been growing for days. This is your fault, Ryder said to her. Clara met his angry eyes and saw past the rage to what was underneath. Grief so fresh it still bled. No, she said quietly. It's not. But the dishes still need doing. You don't tell us what to do. I'm not telling you anything. Your father already did that. Ryder's hands clenched into fists on the table. For a second, Clara thought he might actually hit her, but Cole put a hand on his brother's shoulder. Come on, Cole said. Let's just get it over with. I hate this, Ryder hissed. I know. The boys started clearing the table with angry, jerky movements. Silas joined them silently, carrying dishes like each one weighed 100 pounds. The twins disappeared. Clara heard their feet on the stairs, then the sound of a door closing. She started to help with the dishes, but Cole stopped her. We got it, he said. Not kindly, but not cruel either, just stating fact. Clara nodded and backed away. She stood in the doorway, watching three boys wash dishes they clearly didn't want to wash, in a house that felt more like a battlefield than a home. When they finished, dishes stacked haphazardly to dry, water slopped across the counter. They filed past her without a word. Cole first, then Silas, then Ryder, who made sure to bump her shoulder hard enough to hurt as he went by. Alone in the kitchen, Clara surveyed the damage. The boys had done a terrible job. Dishes still had food on them. The counter was a mess. The floor needed mopping. She should fix it, should redo everything they'd half done. Instead, she left it, picked up the lamp from the table and made her way upstairs. The hallway was dark except for a line of light under one door. She could hear voices behind it, Elias talking to someone in that same soft tone he'd used with Lily. The words were indistinct, but the rhythm was clear, a father putting his children to bed. Clara found her room and closed the door behind her. Someone had brought up linens while she was cooking. They sat folded on the bare mattress, sheets that had been mended several times, a quilt that might have been beautiful once. She made the bed in the lamplight, her hands following motions she'd done 1,000 times before. When she was finished, she sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around the small room that was supposed to be hers now. A sewing basket sat in the corner, covered in dust. Fabric scraps spilled from it, calico and muslin and one piece of dark blue that might have been for a dress. On the wall, someone had started a sampler. The stitching was neat, careful, but it ended halfway through a verse Clara didn't recognize. Sarah Vance had sat in this room, had pushed a needle through fabric in this chair, had looked out this window at this same view, and then she died and left all of it unfinished. Clara touched the blue fabric. It was soft, quality material. the kind you saved for something special. A knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she said. Elias opened the door but didn't enter. He stood in the hallway, still wearing his work clothes, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in a single day. "You settling in all right?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." He shifted his weight. "The boys, they'll get used to you. Just takes time." "I know. Ryder especially. He's been—" Elias stopped, ran a hand over his face. "He's angry all the time. Picks fights with everyone. I don't know how to reach him anymore." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Anyway," Elias straightened. "Breakfast is early, 5:30. I'll be out with the cattle most of the day tomorrow. The kids, well, you'll figure it out." How do you want me to— "Just keep them alive and the house standing." He said it like a joke, but his eyes weren't joking. "That's about all I can manage most days." He left before she could respond, pulling the door closed behind him. Clara sat in the lamplight and listened to the house settle around her. Footsteps above. Someone getting up, using the privy, getting back into bed. The wind outside picking up, rattling the loose shutter she'd noticed earlier. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and another answered. She should blow out the lamp, should try to sleep. Instead, she found herself at the window, looking out at the darkness. No moon tonight, just stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt, and the black shapes of mountains against the slightly less black sky. Down in the valley, a light moved. Someone with a lantern, checking on stock or walking fence lines, or just unable to sleep. Elias, probably. Clara watched the light bob and weave until it disappeared behind the barn. Wondered what kind of man bought a woman he didn't want to help raise children who didn't want her. Wondered what his wife had been like, this Sarah who'd left her sewing unfinished and her family broken. The light appeared again, heading back toward the house. Clara stepped away from the window and blew out the lamp. She lay in the darkness on sheets that smelled like cedar and dust, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt like she belonged somewhere. Her marriage to Daniel had been comfortable, but never quite right. She'd been trying to fit into a space that wasn't made for her. Her father's house had stopped being home the day her mother died. And before that was too far back to reach. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of half-formed dreams. She woke twice to sounds she couldn't identify, heart pounding, before remembering where she was. The third time she woke, gray light was seeping through the window. Morning. Clara dressed in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. She had no others, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but not sleeping quiet. Someone already up quiet. She found Elias in the kitchen, standing over the stove with a pot of coffee. He'd shaved and changed his shirt, but the exhaustion in his face told her he hadn't slept much either. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and held one out. Clara took it, wrapping her hands around the warmth. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it anyway. "There's eggs," Elias said, nodding toward a basket on the counter. "Chickens are still laying, at least. The cow needs milking. Cole usually does it, but he's not always reliable. The garden's yours if you want to try salvaging it, and—" He paused, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "The kids. They need clothes washed, hair combed, lessons if you know how to teach them. Sarah used to handle all that." "I can teach reading and arithmetic," Claire said. "Not much beyond that." "That's more than they're getting now." He drained his coffee in 3 long swallows. "I'll be back by supper. There's a bell by the back door. Ring it if there's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Any kind." He set his cup down. "This land doesn't forgive mistakes." Then he was gone, out the back door and across the yard toward the barn. Clara watched through the window as he saddled a horse, a big roan gelding, and rode out toward the eastern pasture. She was alone with 5 children who hated her. Clara poured herself more coffee and tried to make a plan. Food first. Get everyone fed. Then assess what needed doing and start doing it. Simple. Straightforward. The first child down was Cole. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair sticking up, eyes still half closed. "Morning," Clara said. He grunted something that might have been a greeting and headed straight for the coffee pot. "How old are you?" Clara asked. 12? Old enough for coffee?" "Been drinking it since I was 10. He poured a cup, added enough sugar to choke a horse. Ma didn't care as long as I got my chores done. Clara let it go. Pick your battles, her mother used to say. Your father mentioned milking the cow, she said. Cole's face went carefully blank. Yeah. Is that your job? Supposed to be. But? He stared into his coffee cup like it held secrets. But sometimes I forget, or I'm too tired, or... He stopped, jaw working. I just forget sometimes, all right? All right, Clara said quietly. Where's the bucket? Cole looked up. You're going to do it? Unless you want to. He faltered. I should. It's my job. Then let's both go. You can show me where things are. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or the beginning of something like respect. He nodded and set down his cup. The barn was a disaster. Feed scattered across the floor, tools left out to rust, the whole structure leaning slightly to one side like it was tired of standing. But the cow, a patient brown jersey with sad eyes, was healthy enough, her udder full and clearly uncomfortable. Sorry, Bessie, Cole muttered as he set up the milking stool. I know. I forgot yesterday. He started milking with the ease of long practice, his hands finding the rhythm without thought. Clara watched, noting which bucket he used, where he sat, how he talked to the cow while he worked. My ma taught me this, Cole said suddenly. His voice had gone soft. I was 7. Couldn't get the hang of it for weeks. Bessie kept kicking the bucket over. What changed? Ma told me I had to talk to her. Said cows are like people. They need to know you're paying attention. He rested his forehead against Bessie's flank. Sounds stupid. It doesn't, Clara said. They stood in the barn while Cole finished milking, the only sounds the rhythmic squirt of milk hitting the bucket and Bessie's contented breathing. When he was done, Clara helped him strain the milk and get it stored in the cool box. Back at the house, the other children had started appearing. Ryder came down scowling, Silas silent as always, the twins holding hands and watching everything with those enormous eyes. Clara cooked eggs and the last of the bread. It wasn't much, but everyone ate. Even Ryder, though he made a show of how much he hated every bite. After breakfast, Clara sent the boys outside with instructions to gather kindling. She'd seen how low the woodpile was getting. The twins started to follow, but Clara stopped them. Not you two, she said. You're staying inside today. Lily's eyes welled up. Did we do something bad? No, sweetheart. But your hair needs washing, and those clothes need mending, and I need help figuring out where things are in this house. The children looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Okay, Jonah whispered. Clara heated water and set up a washing station in the kitchen. The twins' hair was a disaster, tangled, matted in places, clearly unloved for months. She worked through it carefully, trying not to pull too hard while Lily sat still as stone, and Jonah kept flinching away from her hands. When's the last time someone washed your hair? Clara asked. Ma used to, Lily said. Every Saturday, with the good soap that smelled like flowers. Do you remember where she kept it? Lily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's gone. Everything's gone. Clara's hand stilled in the child's hair. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it better. But she'd learned the hard way that some hurts didn't have words that could fix them. I'm sorry, she said instead. Are you going to be our new ma? Jonah asked suddenly. The question hit Clara like a fist. No, I'm just here to help. Pa bought you. He did. Like a horse. Something like that. Lily turned to look at her, hair half washed and water dripping down her face. Do you want to be here? Clara opened her mouth, closed it. The truth was complicated, and she wasn't sure these children needed complicated. I want to be somewhere I'm useful, she said finally. Your pa gave me that chance. It wasn't really an answer, but the twins seemed to accept it. They went back to being still while Clara finished washing and combing and braiding their hair into something resembling order. By the time she was done, the boys had returned with kindling, not much, and gathered carelessly, but it was something. Clara set them to stacking it properly while she started on the mountain of laundry. The washing took hours. Every piece of clothing these children owned was filthy, torn, or both. She scrubbed and rinsed and wrung until her hands were raw, then hung everything on the line behind the house to dry in the hot wind. Silas appeared while she was hanging shirts. He stood at the edge of the garden, watching her with those dark, haunted eyes. "Can I help you with something?" Clara asked. He didn't answer, didn't move. Clara went back to hanging clothes, but she could feel him watching. After a few minutes, he drifted closer, stopping at the edge of the clothesline. "Your pa said the garden was mine if I wanted it," Clara said, not looking at him directly. "But I don't know what was planted where. Do you know?" Silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. "Ma had tomatoes there." Clara looked up. Silas was pointing at the far corner where overgrown vines sprawled across the ground. "And beans over there," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "And squash. And lettuce. But that's all gone now." "Did you help her plant it?" A tiny nod. "Then maybe you could help me save what's left." Silas studied her for a long moment. Clara kept her face neutral, neither pushing nor pulling back, just offering. "Okay," he said finally. They worked in the garden together while the afternoon sun beat down. Silas showed her what was weed and what was crop, where the water buckets were kept, which plants needed staking. He didn't talk much, but his hands moved with sureness, muscle memory from seasons spent at his mother's side. "She sang while we worked," Silas said suddenly. "Ma! She knew all these songs. Do you remember any of them?" He shook his head. "They're gone. Everything good is gone." Clara's throat went tight. She wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that good things could come back, that healing was possible. But she'd stood on an auction platform worth $1. She knew about things that felt permanently gone. "Maybe not forever," she said quietly. Silas looked at her with eyes that had seen his mother die and his family fall apart. "You don't know that." "No," Clara admitted. "I don't." They kept working. By the time the sun started sinking toward the mountains, Clara had managed to salvage about half the garden. The rest was too far gone. But half was better than nothing, and the dirt under her fingernails felt earned in a way nothing else had for a long time. The children drifted in as evening approached. Cole and Ryder had been off doing something. Clara hadn't asked, and they hadn't volunteered. They appeared dirty and tired, tracking mud across the clean floor Clara had swept earlier. She started to say something, then stopped. "Choose your battles." Dinner was better than the night before. She'd found a ham in the smokehouse, along with potatoes that were sprouting but still usable. The children ate like they'd been starving, which maybe they had been, in ways that had nothing to do with food. Elias came in just as they were finishing. He looked worse than he had that morning, covered in dust, moving like every muscle hurt. "Fence broke," he said by way of explanation. "Lost half the day fixing it." "There's food," Clara told him. He ate standing up at the counter, too tired to sit. When he finished, he looked around at the children in their clean clothes with their combed hair, at the kitchen that was less chaotic than it had been, at Clara standing by the stove with her sleeves rolled up and her hair falling down. "You did good today," he said. Clara felt something crack in her chest. Not break. Crack. Like ice beginning to thaw. "Thank you," she managed. Elias nodded and headed upstairs. Within minutes, Clara heard his door close and then silence. The children followed soon after, worn out from a day that had demanded more of them than usual. Clara supervised teeth brushing and face washing, listened to Cole and Ryder arguing about something that didn't matter, watched the twins climb into bed together even though they each had their own. Silas was last. He stood in his doorway, looking at her with those two old eyes. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "can we work in the garden again?" "If you want to." "I do." He closed his door. Clara made her way downstairs and finished cleaning the kitchen. It was past dark now, the house settling into nighttime rhythms. She should go to bed, should rest while she could. Instead, she found herself in the parlor, looking at the photographs on the mantel she'd been avoiding all day. Sarah Vance stared back from a dozen different frames. Young Sarah on her wedding day. Older Sarah with a baby in her arms. Sarah surrounded by children. Sarah laughing. Sarah serious. Sarah everywhere. She'd been beautiful. Not in a delicate way, but strong-featured and clear-eyed. The kind of woman who looked like she could handle anything. And then she died, and proved that even the strong couldn't handle everything. Clara picked up one photograph. Sarah with all 5 children. Everyone smiling, everyone whole. The kind of family portrait that was supposed to mean something. Happiness. Stability. Forever. She set it back carefully, exactly where it had been. You can't replace her. Clara spun around. Ryder stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face set in angry lines. I know that, Clara said. Then why are you looking at her pictures? Because she lived here, because this was her house. It's still her house. Ryder's voice shook. You're just borrowing it. Clara studied the boy in front of her, 9 years old and carrying rage like armor, using it to protect whatever was soft underneath. You're right, she said quietly. It is still her house, and I'm not trying to make it mine. Then what are you trying to do? Clara thought about that. I'm trying to keep it standing, that's all. Ryder's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. For a second, Clara thought he might cry, but he pulled it back, swallowed it down. She was better than you, he said. I believe you. That seemed to throw him. He'd been expecting an argument, denial, something to push against. She made good bread, he said, less certain now. And she knew all the stars. And she never forgot anything. She sounds remarkable. She was. His voice cracked. And now she's dead, and Pa brought you here, and everyone's just supposed to act like everything's fine. I don't think anyone expects that, Clara said. Then what do they expect? I don't know. Maybe just to keep getting up every morning, to keep going. Ryder stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and ran upstairs, feet pounding on the steps. Clara stood alone in the parlor, surrounded by photographs of a dead woman, and felt the weight of everything she'd taken on settling across her shoulders. This was going to be harder than she'd thought, and she'd already thought it would be impossible. 3 weeks passed like water through clenched fists. Clara learned the rhythms of the house the way you learn a language. Badly at first, then with growing fluency born of repetition and necessity. She learned that Cole woke before dawn but moved slow until he'd had coffee. That Ryder's anger burned hottest in the mornings and cooled by evening. That Silas spoke more to plants than people. That the twins needed to sleep together or they'd both have nightmares. That Elias came in from the range every night looking like a man at the end of his rope, ate whatever she put in front of him, and disappeared upstairs without conversation. She learned which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck, which drawer held the good knives, and which held the broken ones nobody had bothered to throw away. She learned to cook on a stove that ran too hot on the left side and barely warm on the right. To pump water that sometimes ran clear and sometimes came up rust-colored, depending on reasons she couldn't figure. To make bread that wasn't quite as good as Sarah's had been. She knew this because Ryder told her every single time she served it. The house fought her. Fought her like it had a will of its own and resented her presence. The moment she fixed one thing, another broke. She'd patch a hole in Cole's pants, and Jonah would tear his shirt. She'd scrub the kitchen floor, and someone would track mud through 5 minutes later. She'd get the garden watered, and the chickens would break through the fence and destroy half a row of beans. But she kept at it. What else was there to do? On a Tuesday morning, when the heat was already making the air shimmer by breakfast time, Clara went out to collect eggs and found Bessie lying on her side in the barn, breathing wrong. "Cole?" Clara's voice cracked across the yard. The boy came running, took one look at the cow, and went pale. "Is she—" "Get your father, now!" Cole took off at a sprint toward the eastern pasture where Elias had ridden out an hour before. Clara knelt beside Bessie, ran her hands over the cow's distended belly, and felt her heart sink. She didn't know much about cattle, but she knew bloat when she saw it, and she knew it could kill. Bessie's eye rolled toward her, white-rimmed with panic. "I know," Clara murmured. "I know it hurts." She'd seen her father treat bloat once, years ago. Seen him take a knife, and she pushed the memory away. That was a last resort. Maybe Elias would know something else. Ryder appeared in the barn doorway. "What's wrong with her?" "She's sick. Stay back." "Is she going to die?" "I don't know." "Everything dies here," Ryder's voice went flat. "Everything." Clara looked up at him, saw the way his hands trembled despite his steady voice, saw the fear under the anger. "Not if I can help it," she said. It was a stupid thing to promise. She had no control over whether this cow lived or died, but something in Ryder's face made her say it anyway. Elias arrived 15 minutes later with Cole, took one look at Bessie, and cursed. He knelt beside the cow, pressed his ear to her belly, listened. "How long's she been like this?" he asked. "I don't know. I found her maybe 20 minutes ago." Elias stood, ran both hands through his hair. "We might lose her." "There has to be something." "There is." He met her eyes. "But it's not pretty, and I'm going to need help." Clara's stomach clenched. "Tell me what to do." What followed was brutal and messy, and nothing like anything Clara had done before. Elias talked her through it, how to hold Bessie's head, where to put pressure, when to move. The cow thrashed and bellowed, and Clara held on with hands that were shaking and tried not to think about how this could all go wrong in a dozen different ways. The children gathered at the barn door. Clara could feel them watching, could feel their fear mixing with her own. "Almost there," Elias muttered. His hands moved with surprising gentleness despite the violence of what he was doing. "Come on, girl, come on!" Bessie let out one last bellow, then went still. For a terrible second, Clara thought they'd lost her. Then the cow's sides heaved, and air rushed into her lungs, and her eye cleared. Elias sat back on his heels, covered in filth, breathing hard. "Well, that's something." Clara's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She clenched them together, pressed them against her stomach. "You all right?" Elias asked. "Fine." "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. Elias studied her for a moment, then stood and offered his hand. Clara took it and let him pull her up. Her legs felt unsteady. "You did good," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything. You stayed. That's more than most would have done." He turned to the children. "Show's over. Get back to your chores." They scattered, all except Ryder, who stood staring at Bessie with an expression Clara couldn't read. "She's going to be all right," Clara told him. "This time." Ryder's jaw worked. "But next time, or the time after that, we'll deal with next time when it comes." He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw something shift in his face. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. The first crack in the armor. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders hunched against something only he could feel. Elias stayed to watch over Bessie while Clara went back to the house to clean up. Her dress was ruined, her hands raw, and she was shaking so hard she had to sit down on the back steps before she could make it inside. She'd almost watched that cow die. Almost failed at the first real test this place had thrown at her. The door opened behind her. Silas stepped out, holding a cup of water. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly. Clara took the cup with trembling hands and drank. The water was cool, sweet, probably from the spring Silas had shown her last week when they were working in the garden. "Thank you." Silas sat down beside her. They stayed there in silence while the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down like a hand. "My ma saved a calf once," Silas said eventually. "It was born too early, too small. Pa said it wouldn't make it, but Ma stayed up with it for 3 nights, feeding it milk from a bottle, keeping it warm, and it lived." "What happened to it?" "We sold it at market." Silas picked at a splinter in the step. "Ma said that's how ranching works. You save them so you can sell them." But she still cried when the truck came to take it away. Clara thought about Sarah Vance crying over a calf she'd saved. About caring for something even when you knew the caring would end in loss. "Your mother sounds like she had a good heart," Clara said. "She did." Silas's voice went small. "I miss her all the time. Every day. Every minute." Clara's throat went tight. "I know. Do you?" He turned to look at her with those dark eyes. "Did you lose your ma, too?" "A long time ago. I was about your age." "Does it get better?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara could lie, could tell him what adults always told grieving children, that time heals, that it gets easier, that the pain fades. But she'd been a grieving child once. She knew what lies sounded like. "It gets different," she said instead. "The hurt doesn't go away, but you get stronger at carrying it." Silas nodded slowly, like this made sense to him in a way platitudes wouldn't have. "I don't want to forget her." "You won't. The people we love, they stay with us. In here." Clara pressed her hand to her chest. "Even when they're gone." They sat together while the morning wore on, and Clara felt something shift between them. Some small bridge being built, board by careful board. That evening, Elias came in looking thoughtful. Bessie was recovering well, he reported, grazing again. The crisis had passed. Dinner was quieter than usual. Even Ryder kept his comments to himself, pushing food around his plate with unusual restraint. The twins ate without their usual whispered conversations. Cole kept glancing at Clara like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. After the children went to bed, Elias lingered in the kitchen while Clara washed dishes. "Need to talk to you about something," he said. Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. "All right." "The bank came by today while I was out with the cattle. Left a notice." He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket, smoothed it on the table. "They're calling in the loan. I got 60 days to come up with $800 or they take the ranch." The number hit Clara like a fist. $800 might as well be 8,000. 8 million. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know." Elias slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every year of his age and then some. "Sell the cattle, maybe, but that won't bring enough. Not this time of year, not with prices the way they are. There has to be something. There isn't." His voice went flat. "I've been over it 100 times. The math doesn't work. We're going to lose this place." Clara dried her hands on her apron, looked around the kitchen she'd been fighting to keep clean, thought about the garden she and Silas had been saving, the children sleeping upstairs in their mended clothes. "So what happens to the kids?" she asked. Elias's face went gray. "I've got a brother in Kansas. He said he'd take Cole and Ryder, put them to work on his farm. The little ones—" He stopped, couldn't finish. "The little ones what?" "There's an orphanage in Denver. It's not much, but they'd be fed, educated." Claire's vision went white at the edges. "You'd split them up?" "What choice do I have?" Elias's voice cracked. "I can't keep them together if I can't keep them at all." "There's always a choice. Not for me. Not anymore." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud in the quiet kitchen. "I thought I could hold this together, thought I could be enough. But Sarah was the one who knew how to make things work. I'm just a man who's good with cattle and not much else." He left before Clara could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara stood alone in the kitchen and felt rage building in her chest. Not at Elias. He was doing the best he could with what he had. But at the unfairness of it all. At the way the world ground down good people and took away the things they loved. At banks that didn't care about 5 children who'd already lost their mother and were about to lose everything else. She finished the dishes with angry, jerky movements, dried them, put them away. Then she went upstairs to her small room and sat at the window, staring out at the dark valley. Somewhere in the night, an owl called. Another answered. The ordinary sounds of a world that kept turning regardless of human suffering. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and made a decision. She didn't know how yet, didn't have a plan, but somehow, some way, she was going to keep this family together. Because if she didn't, what was the point of any of it? What was the point of being here, of trying, of staying in a place that didn't want her? She'd been sold for $1 and dropped into an impossible situation. Fine. She'd work with impossible. The next morning, Clara was up before dawn. She made coffee, started bread, then went out to the barn where Elias was already saddling his horse. "I want to go into town," she said. Elias paused, cinch strap in hand. "What for?" "To talk to people. See if anyone needs work done. Sewing, cooking, cleaning, anything that pays." "Clara, see, you said you need $800. I'm going to help you get it." "You can't earn that kind of money doing laundry." "Maybe not, but I can earn something, and something is more than nothing." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. Surprise, maybe? Or the beginning of hope he was afraid to feel. "All right," he said finally. "Take the wagon, but be back before dark. And if anyone gives you trouble, I can handle trouble." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yeah, I'm starting to think you can." Clara drove the wagon into Dustridge with her spine straight and her chin up. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She'd stood on that auction platform and survived. This was nothing. Her first stop was the general store. Mrs. Patterson, who ran it with her husband, looked up from the counter with barely concealed surprise. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said, "didn't expect to see you back in town." "I'm looking for work," Clara said simply. "Sewing, mending, anything that needs doing. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows climbed. You're asking me for work? I'm asking if you know anyone who needs it done. The older woman studied her. Clara could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. The gossip value versus the potential usefulness versus whatever complicated feelings people had about women sold at auction. Helen Morrison's been complaining about her curtains, Mrs. Patterson said finally. Says they need taking in, and the widow Fletcher mentioned needing someone to help with her spring cleaning, but she's particular about who she lets in her house. I can do curtains and cleaning. Can you? Yes, ma'am, I can. Mrs. Patterson wrote 2 addresses on a scrap of paper. Tell them I sent you. Don't make me regret it. I won't. By noon, Clara had visited 6 houses and secured 4 jobs. It wasn't much. Hemming curtains, washing windows, mending a pile of clothes that looked like it had been accumulating for years. But it was work, and work meant money. She was leaving the widow Fletcher's house when she ran into Bradley Stevens on the street. Mrs. Vance, he said, tipping his hat. The name felt wrong on his tongue. She wasn't Mrs. Vance, she was just Clara, but out here names mattered and titles more so. Mr. Stevens, heard you're looking for work. News traveled fast in small towns. I am. How's Elias doing out there? Heard the bank's circling. Clara's jaw tightened. We're managing. Are you? Bradley's eyes sharpened. Because if things get too hard, if Elias needs to make arrangements for those kids, he doesn't. Now don't be prideful. There's no shame in admitting when a situation's beyond salvaging. Those children deserve stability, and if Elias can't provide it, thank you for your concern, Mr. Stevens, but we'll be fine. She walked away before he could say more. Her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. The nerve of him. Acting like he cared about those children when what he really cared about was having something to gossip about over dinner. On her way back to the wagon, Clara passed the church. Sheriff Porter sat on the steps, whittling something from a piece of wood. Afternoon, Clara, he said. Sheriff, heard you're drumming up work. Word travels. It does. He set down his whittling. Look, I know it's not my place, but those kids, they doing all right? Clara stopped, looked at the sheriff's weathered face and saw genuine concern there, not judgment. They're grieving, she said honestly, and angry and scared, but they're surviving. And Elias? Trying his best. Porter nodded slowly. Sarah was good people, best woman I ever knew, and I'm including my own late wife in that. When she died, he stopped, cleared his throat. Well, it broke something in this whole town. Felt wrong. Her being gone. Still feels wrong. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said quietly. I know, but you're trying to help, and that counts for something. He picked up his whittling again. If you need anything, if those kids need anything, you let me know. Understand? Clara felt her throat tighten. Yes, sir. Thank you. She drove home as the sun started its descent, the wagon rattling over ruts, her mind churning with numbers. 4 jobs at 50 cents each was $2. Not nearly enough. Not even close. But it was a start. The children were waiting when she pulled up to the house. Even Ryder, though he tried to pretend he wasn't. Where were you? Cole demanded. In town, getting work. What kind of work? The kind that pays? Clara climbed down from the wagon. Where's your father? Still out with the cattle. He said you shouldn't have gone alone. Well, I'm back now, and I'm fine. That night at dinner, Clara told Elias about the jobs she'd secured. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. It's not enough, he said when she finished. I know, but it's something. Clara, I'm not giving up on this. She met his eyes across the table. I know I'm only here because you paid $1 and needed help. But those kids upstairs, they've already lost their mother. They don't deserve to lose their home, too. Elias was quiet for a long moment. The children had gone still, listening. All right, he said finally. We'll try it your way. But Clara, don't get their hopes up. Don't make promises we can't keep. I won't. But even as she said it, Clara knew she'd already made the promise. To herself, if not to them. She was going to save this family or die trying. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of work. Clara was up before dawn cooking breakfast and packing lunches. Then she'd ride into town for whatever job she'd lined up, washing, mending, cleaning. She'd come home in the afternoon to cook dinner, help with homework, get the children to bed. Then she'd sit up by lamplight doing more sewing, more mending, squeezing every penny she could from every hour she had. The money accumulated slowly. $3, $5, $7. By the end of the third week, she had $12 saved. It felt like nothing against the $800 they needed, but she kept it in a jar on her dresser anyway and added to it whenever she could. The children noticed. Of course they noticed. "Why are you doing this?" Ryder asked one evening. He'd found her in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed, mending shirts by lamplight. Clara threaded her needle before answering. "Because the work needs doing." "That's not what I mean." Ryder sat down across from her. "Why do you care? You're not our ma. You're just someone Pa bought." Clara set down her sewing, looked at this angry, hurting boy who was trying so hard to push her away. "You're right," she said. "I'm not your mother. I'll never be your mother. But I'm here and you're here and this place." She gestured around the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's home. And I've learned that home is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. What if we lose anyway? Then at least we'll have tried." Ryder's face worked. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "I don't understand you." "You don't have to understand me. You just have to let me help." He left without another word. But something had shifted. Clara could feel it, subtle as a change in wind direction, but just as real. 2 days later, Lily got sick. It started with a cough. Nothing serious, Clara thought, just a summer cold. But by evening, the little girl was burning with fever, her small body shaking with chills despite the heat. Clara pressed a cool cloth to Lily's forehead and felt fear claw its way up her throat. She'd watched Daniel's mother die of fever, watched her father's friends succumb to influenza. Fever was how Sarah had died, according to the whispers Clara had overheard in town. Fever killed. "Elias," Clara called down the stairs. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need you." He came running, took one look at Lily, and went pale. Clara saw the memories crash over him, his wife, dying in this same house, probably in this same bed. "We need the doctor," Clara said. "He's in Silvertown. Won't be back for 3 days." "Then we handle it ourselves." "Clara, if we lose her." "We won't." Clara said it with more certainty than she felt. "Go get cool water from the spring and find Silas. Tell him I need fever few if he knows where any grows." Elias hesitated, clearly torn between staying and doing what she asked. "Go," Clara said firmly. "I've got her." He went. Clara worked through the night with hands that remembered her mother's lessons. Cool cloths to bring down the fever, water, forced sip by sip between cracked lips. The fever-few tea that Silas brought, bitter but effective. And all the while she talked, told stories, sang songs she half remembered from childhood, anything to keep Lily tethered to the world. The other children gathered in the doorway. Jonah, clutching his sister's rag doll. Cole, trying to look brave and failing. Ryder, angry even in fear. Silas, silent but present. "Is she going to die?" Jonah whispered. "No," Clara said. "You can't know that." "You're right. I can't. But I'm going to fight like hell to make sure she doesn't." The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. The fever climbed higher, and Lily started making sounds that weren't quite words, her small hands clutching at blankets that weren't there. Clara didn't let herself think about failure, didn't let herself remember all the other times she'd stood beside a sickbed and watched someone slip away. She just kept working, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Elias brought her coffee. Their hands touched as he passed the cup, and Clara saw raw terror in his eyes. "I can't lose another one," he said hoarsely. "I can't." "You won't." "You don't know that. Nobody knows that." "Then I'm choosing to believe it anyway." He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Then he nodded once and left her to it. Dawn came slow and gray. Clara's back ached from bending over the bed. Her hands were pruned from constant water wringing. Her voice had gone hoarse from hours of stories and songs. But Lily's fever hadn't broken. Clara changed the cloth again, pressed it to the child's burning skin, and felt despair trying to claw its way in. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe some fights couldn't be won. Maybe she was foolish to think she could. Lily's eyes opened. "Thirsty," the little girl croaked. Clara nearly dropped the cloth. "What?" "I'm thirsty." Lily's voice was weak but clear. Present. Here. "Oh, thank—" Clara caught herself, swallowed the prayer she'd been about to offer. "Here, drink this." She held the cup while Lily sipped, then felt the child's forehead with trembling fingers. Cooler. Not much, but cooler. The fever was breaking. Clara sat back on her heels and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours. Relief hit her so hard she had to grab the bedpost to stay upright. "Is she—" Jonah appeared in the doorway, eyes huge. "She's going to be fine," Clara managed. "The fever's breaking." The boy let out a sob and ran to his sister's bedside. Within seconds, all the children had crowded into the room, touching Lily's hand, her hair, her arm, needing to confirm she was real. She was here. She was staying. Elias leaned against the doorframe, and Clara saw tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "You did it," he said roughly. "You kept her." Clara shook her head. "We kept her. All of us." But even as she said it, she knew something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed in the dark hours of that night. The children looked at her differently now. Not like a stranger, not like an intruder, like someone who'd proven they belonged. Lily recovered slowly over the next week, regaining strength in increments so small Clara sometimes wondered if she was imagining them. But the child ate, drank water without prompting, started sitting up on her own. Small victories that felt monumental after how close they'd come to losing her. The children's attitude toward Clara shifted in ways both obvious and subtle. Ryder stopped making cutting remarks about her cooking. Cole started asking her opinion on things, instead of just going to his father. Silas worked beside her in the garden without being asked. And the twins, Jonah and Lily both, started following her around the house like small shadows, wanting to be near but not quite knowing how to ask for what they needed. Even Elias changed. He talked to her more at dinner, asked about her day, sometimes stayed in the kitchen after the children went to bed and just sat there drinking coffee while she mended clothes. They didn't say much during those quiet evenings, but the silence felt different now. Less empty. More like two people learning to exist in the same space without friction. But the bank notice still sat on the mantel, counting down days like a ticking clock. Clara had managed to save $23. A fortune by her standards, a joke compared to what they needed. She took on more work, pushing herself until her hands cramped and her eyes burned from sewing by lamplight. It still wasn't enough. 5 weeks after Lily's fever broke, a woman showed up at the ranch. Clara was in the garden with Silas, pulling weeds that seemed to grow back overnight when she heard the wagon. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and watched a well-dressed woman climb down from a buggy that looked too fine for the dusty roads out here. The woman was maybe 40, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a dress that spoke of money and taste. She surveyed the ranch with the kind of critical eye Clara had learned to recognize, the look of someone cataloging failures. "Can I help you?" Clara called out, brushing dirt from her hands. The woman turned. Her gaze swept over Clara's patched dress and work-roughened hands with barely concealed disdain. "I'm looking for Elias Vance. He's out with the cattle. Should be back by supper." "And you are?" Clara felt her spine straighten. "Clara, I help with the house and children." "I see." The woman's lips pursed. "I'm Margaret Whitmore, from the County Board of Child Welfare." The words hit Clara like cold water. "I wasn't aware we were expecting anyone from the county. That's rather the point of inspections, isn't it? They're unannounced." Margaret pulled out a small notebook. "I've received reports that there are 5 children living here in questionable conditions. I'm here to assess the situation." "Who reported us?" "That's confidential." But something in the woman's expression made Clara think of Bradley Stevens and his concerned comments in town. Of course, people who claimed to care but really just wanted something to talk about. "The children are fine," Clara said firmly. "They're fed, clothed, educated. I'll be the judge of that." Margaret started toward the house. "I'll need to see their living quarters, inspect the kitchen, interview the children. And I'll need documentation, birth certificates, medical records, proof of adequate supervision." Clara followed, her mind racing. Birth certificates were probably somewhere in the house. Medical records? She had no idea. And adequate supervision? What did that even mean when you were trying to hold together a family that had already lost so much? The inspection was brutal. Margaret went through the house like a general surveying a battlefield, making notes about everything. The crack in the parlor window, the uneven floorboard in the upstairs hallway, the shortage of warm blankets, the fact that the twins shared a bed. "This is hardly appropriate," Margaret said, gesturing at Jonah and Lily's room. "Children need their own sleeping spaces." "They want to sleep together," Clara said. "They have nightmares when they're apart." That suggests trauma that hasn't been properly addressed. Their mother died. Of course they're traumatized. Margaret made another note. "And where exactly do you sleep, Mrs. Whitlock?" End of the hall. "You're married?" "Widowed." "I see. And Mr. Vance's relationship to you is employer." The word tasted bitter, but it was technically true. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You're not married to Mr. Vance?" "No. So these children are living in a house with an unrelated woman and their father. No mother figure, no proper family structure." More notes. "This is exactly the sort of situation the county aims to prevent." Clara felt panic rising in her throat. "The children are well cared for. They're happy here." "Happy?" Margaret looked around the modest room with its patched curtains and worn rug. "Children need stability, structure, two-parent households with proper moral guidance. This," she gestured vaguely, "this is barely adequate at best." The children had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the strange woman's voice. Clara saw the fear in their faces, the way Cole had positioned himself in front of his younger siblings like a shield. "I'll need to interview each child separately," Margaret announced, "starting with the oldest." "No," Clara said. Margaret blinked. "Excuse me? You are not interviewing anyone until their father gets home. These children have been through enough without being interrogated by a stranger." "I have the authority." "I don't care what authority you have. You'll wait for Elias." They stared at each other across the small room. Margaret's face hardened. "This hostility only reinforces my concerns about this household." "Then be concerned. But you're not talking to those children without their father present." Margaret snapped her notebook shut. "Very well, I'll wait, but understand, Mrs. Whitlock, this inspection is not going well. I have serious doubts about Mr. Vance's ability to provide adequate care. And given the ranch's financial difficulties, yes, I'm aware of those as well, it seems increasingly likely that these children would be better served by alternative placement." "Alternative placement?" Clara's voice came out flat. "You mean taking them away?" "I mean, ensuring their welfare. The county has excellent facilities. They have a home here." "Do they?" Margaret looked around the kitchen with its mismatched dishes and patched curtains. "Or do they have a father who's drowning and a woman of questionable standing trying to hold together something that's already broken?" Clara's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw this judgmental woman out of the house bodily. Instead, she forced herself to take a breath. "Wait in the parlor," she said quietly. "I'll make coffee." Margaret settled herself on the sofa like a queen on a throne while Clara put water on to boil. Her hands shook as she measured out grounds. This couldn't be happening. They'd fought too hard, come too far. She'd saved Lily. She'd held this family together. They couldn't lose everything now. Cole appeared at her elbow. "She going to take us away?" "No," Clara said with more conviction than she felt. "She looks like she wants to. I won't let her. How are you going to stop her? She's from the county. She has papers and authority and—" "Cole." Clara turned to face him. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever that woman says, you're not going anywhere. None of you are." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear and hope tangled together in a way that made Clara's heart ache. He was 12 years old and already learning that promises could be broken, that adults couldn't always protect you, that the world was full of people who claimed to know what was best for you without bothering to ask what you wanted. The coffee finished brewing. Clara poured 2 cups, carried them to the parlor on a tray that had seen better days. Margaret accepted hers with a thin smile. "You're protective of them," she observed. "That's admirable. But protection isn't the same as providing a proper home. What would you know about proper homes?" The question came out before Clara could stop it. Margaret's smile went sharp. I know that children need stability, married parents, financial security, not a struggling ranch run by a grieving widower and a woman who, forgive me for being blunt, was purchased at auction like livestock. So that's how it was. Someone had told her about the auction, probably the same someone who'd reported them in the first place. That doesn't change who I am now, Clara said. Doesn't it? A woman with no legal standing in this household, no claim to these children, no protection under law. If something happened to Mr. Vance, you'd be out within the day. What kind of stability is that? Clara had no answer. Because Margaret was right. She had no legal claim to anything here. Not the house, not the ranch, certainly not the children. She was a hired hand at best, a charity case at worst. They sat in tense silence until the sound of hoofbeats announced Elias's return. Clara met him at the door, spoke quickly before he could come inside. There's a woman from the county, child welfare. She's inspecting the house. Elias went pale. What? Someone reported us. She's been taking notes, asking questions. Elias, she's talking about taking the children. Like hell! He pushed past her into the house, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my house? Margaret stood, unruffled by his anger. Mr. Vance, I'm Margaret Whitmore from the county board. I'm conducting a routine inspection. Routine? Elias's laugh was harsh. There's nothing routine about showing up unannounced and threatening to take my children. I haven't threatened anything. I'm simply assessing whether this environment is suitable for their continued care. My children are fine. Are they? Margaret opened her notebook. Let's see. 5 children under 13. No mother. A father who's barely keeping the ranch afloat. Mounting debt. An unmarried woman of questionable background living under the same roof. The youngest recovering from a serious illness that wasn't treated by a proper physician. Because the nearest doctor was 3 days away, Clara interjected. And she's fine. Better than fine. Margaret ignored her, keeping her attention on Elias. Mr. Vance, I understand you're doing your best. But your best may not be good enough. These children have already suffered the loss of their mother. Surely you can see that placing them in stable homes— This is their home, Elias said. His voice had gone dangerously quiet. A home you're about to lose to the bank. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elias's jaw worked, and Clara saw him struggling to control his temper. Get out, he said finally. Mr. Vance, get out of my house, now. Margaret closed her notebook with deliberate precision. Very well. But understand, I'll be filing my report with the county board. They'll make a decision about placement within the week. If you care about these children at all, you'll prepare them for that possibility. She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. Elias stood in the middle of the parlor, hands clenched at his sides, breathing hard. The children had crept down the stairs and stood watching from the hallway. Pa? Cole's voice was small. Is she really going to take us? Elias turned to look at his children, all 5 of them lined up like refugees waiting for news. Something in his face crumpled. I don't know, he said hoarsely. I'm sorry. I don't know. That night nobody slept much. Clara could hear people moving around upstairs, footsteps pacing, doors opening and closing, whispered conversations that she couldn't make out. She sat in her room and stared at the jar on her dresser. $23. What a joke. Around midnight, someone knocked on her door. Come in, Clara said. Elias entered, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Can we talk? Of course. He sat in the chair by the window, ran both hands through his hair. I'm going to lose them, all of them, the ranch, the children, everything. You don't know that. Yes, I do. His voice was flat with defeat. That woman was right about all of it. I'm drowning out here. Have been since Sarah died. I thought I could hold it together through pure stubbornness, but— He stopped, swallowed hard. They deserve better than this. They deserve their father. Do they? A father who can't keep a roof over their heads? Who works himself to exhaustion and still can't make the numbers work? Who— His voice cracked. Who was so desperate he bought a woman at auction because he couldn't handle raising his own children alone? Clara flinched. There it was, the truth laid bare and ugly. You did what you had to do, she said quietly. Did I? Because it feels like everything I touch turns to dust. Elias looked at her with eyes that had given up. You should leave, Clara, before this all comes crashing down. You've done more than anyone could ask, more than I had any right to expect. But staying, it's just going to hurt worse when it ends. I'm not leaving. Why not? You don't owe us anything. That $1 I paid, it doesn't make you responsible for any of this. Clara thought about that, about the platform, and the auction, and the shame of being worth so little. About 3 weeks of fighting to save a family that wasn't hers, about Lily's fever breaking and Silas's rare smiles and Ryder's slowly crumbling walls. You're right, she said. I don't owe you anything, but those children up there, they've started to trust me, and I'll be damned if I'm going to prove that trust was misplaced by running at the first sign of real trouble. Elias stared at her. You're serious? Yes. Even if we lose? Even if the county takes them anyway? Then at least we'll have fought. At least they'll know someone tried. Something shifted in Elias's expression. Not hope exactly. He was too beaten down for that. But maybe the memory of what hope felt like. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Then it faded, and he was serious again. There might be a way. To keep them. To keep everything. What way? He took a breath. If we were married, legally married, that would solve half of Margaret's objections. 2-parent household, stable family structure. It wouldn't fix the money problems, but it would make it harder for them to justify taking the kids. Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to help me save my children. There's a difference. Is there? Elias met her eyes. I can't offer you love, Clara. I don't have it to give. Sarah took that with her when she died. But I can offer you a place, a real place. Not just hired help, but family. Legal claim to these kids if something happens to me. A share in the ranch for whatever that's worth. He paused. It's not much, but it's all I have. Clara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the valley lay dark and quiet under a sliver of moon. Somewhere out there was the life she might have had. Different choices, different chances. But that life had ended on an auction platform. This was the life she had now. What about the children, she asked. What would they say? I think they'd say yes. They've gotten used to you, some of them more than others, but... He shrugged. You kept Lily alive. That counts for something. And you? What do you say? Elias was quiet for a long moment. I say I'm too tired to do this alone anymore. I say you're the only person who's stuck around when things got hard. I say, his voice roughened, I say I'd be honored to have you as my wife, even if it's just on paper. Just on paper. A marriage of convenience, no love, no romance, just 2 broken people trying to save 5 children from a system that wanted to tear them apart. Clara had dreamed of marriage once, the real kind, with flowers and promises and someone who looked at her like she hung the moon. She'd had a version of that with Daniel, though it had never quite fit right. Now here was Elias, offering her something completely different, something practical and honest and devoid of illusion. All right, she heard herself say. Elias stood. All right? Yes, I'll marry you. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hands in his. They were rough and calloused, working hands that had held too much loss. Thank you, he said. I know it's not what you probably wanted. What I want is to keep this family together, Clara interrupted. If marriage does that, then that's what we'll do. They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, making promises without poetry. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly hopeful. But it was real, and Clara had learned that real was worth more than pretty lies. The next morning, Elias told the children at breakfast. Clara and I are getting married, he announced without preamble. Soon as we can arrange it. The county woman's report gave us about a week, so we'll do it before then. The children stared. Ryder's spoon clattered into his bowl. What? Cole said. You heard me. Clara's going to become your legal mother. Stepmother, technically, but it amounts to the same thing. But you two aren't, Cole struggled for words. You're just doing this because of that woman from the county. Yes, Elias said, and because it's the right thing to do. Clara's been part of this family for weeks now. Might as well make it official. Silas looked at Clara with those dark eyes. Do you want to marry Pa? Everyone went still. The question hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortable. Clara could lie. Could say yes, of course, we're in love. But these children had already had too many lies. I want to stay, she said instead. I want to keep this family together. If marrying your father does that, then yes, I want to. Lily slid off her chair and crossed to Clara, wrapped small arms around her waist. I want you to stay too. The words unlocked something. Jonah joined his sister. Then Silas, moving slowly like he wasn't quite sure it was allowed. Cole hesitated, then gave a small nod that felt like permission. Even Ryder, still scowling, didn't object. All right then, Elias said roughly. It's settled. They were married 3 days later in Sheriff Porter's office with 4 witnesses. The sheriff himself, Mrs. Patterson from the general store, the widow Fletcher, and Cole standing stiff in his one good shirt. The ceremony took maybe 5 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration, just 2 people saying words that bound them together legally, if not emotionally. Clara wore the blue dress she'd found in Sarah's sewing basket. She'd finished it by lamplight the night before, her fingers moving through the familiar motions of needle and thread. It fit well enough. She pretended not to notice the way Elias's jaw tightened when he saw her in it. Do you, Elias Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Whitlock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at Elias, saw the exhaustion in his face, the grief that still lived in his eyes, the desperate hope that this might actually work. I do, she said. Sheriff Porter pronounced them married. There was no kiss. Elias just nodded once, signed the papers, and that was that. Clara Vance. That was her name now. They drove home in the wagon with Cole sitting between them like a chaperone. The boy kept sneaking glances at both of them, clearly trying to figure out what had just happened. Nothing's going to change, Elias said, reading his son's thoughts. Clara's still Clara. I'm still your pa. We made it legal, that's all. Ma would... Cole stopped himself. Ma would want you safe, Elias said quietly. That's all she ever wanted, and if this keeps you safe, then this is what we're doing. The rest of the children were waiting when they got home. Someone, probably Silas, had picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the kitchen table. It was a small gesture, probably meaningless, but it made Clara's throat tight. So you're really married now? Ryder asked. Really married, Clara confirmed. Does that mean we can call you Ma? The question came from Lily. All the children turned to look at Clara, waiting. Clara's mind went to the photographs on the mantel, to Sarah Vance with her strong features and clear eyes, to the woman who'd planted the garden and made the children's clothes and left such a gaping hole when she died. Your mother's name was Sarah, Clara said carefully. And she'll always be your mother. Nothing changes that. I'm just Clara, and that's enough. Lily's face fell slightly. But if you're married to Pa, then I'm your stepmother, legally. But you can call me whatever feels right to you. Ma, Clara, that lady who burns the bread sometimes. A few of the children cracked small smiles. It doesn't matter what you call me. What matters is that I'm here, and I'm staying. That night, Elias moved his things into Clara's room. Their room now. It felt strange having him there, this man who was now her husband occupying space that had been hers alone. I can sleep on the floor, he offered, looking at the single bed. Don't be ridiculous. We're adults. We can share a bed without... Clara stopped, felt her face heat. Without complications, Elias finished. Right. They got ready for bed in awkward silence, each trying to give the other privacy in the small space. When they finally settled under the covers, they stayed on opposite edges of the mattress, careful not to touch. Clara, Elias said into the darkness, thank you for doing this, for... He paused. For everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I need you to understand this marriage, it might be just paperwork to the county, but to me it means something. You've earned a place here. You've earned the right to call yourself their mother, even if you don't use the title. And I'll make sure everyone knows that. The county, the bank, anyone who questions it. Clara stared at the ceiling, And what about you? What do I call myself to you? My wife, he said simply. That's what the law says. That's what we are. They lay in silence after that. Eventually, Elias's breathing evened out into sleep. Clara stayed awake longer, listening to this man breathe beside her, trying to wrap her mind around the fact that she was married again, that she'd gone from being worth $1 to being someone's legal wife in the span of 2 months. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead, it made her want to cry. But she'd cried enough. Now there was work to do, a marriage certificate to file with the county, Margaret Whitmore's report to counter, a family to keep together against odds that still felt impossible. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, she'd figure out the rest. The marriage certificate reached the county office 3 days before Margaret Whitmore's report was due. Clara knew because Sheriff Porter told her when she went into town for supplies, his weathered face creased with something that might have been approval. That was smart thinking, he said, leaning against the counter of the general store. Legal marriage makes it a lot harder for them to argue unstable household. It wasn't about being smart, Clara said, counting out coins for flour and sugar. It was about doing what needed doing. Porter nodded slowly. Sarah used to say the same thing. That woman never overcomplicated anything, just saw what needed doing and did it. He paused. You remind me of her sometimes, not in looks or manner, but in that. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just took her supplies and left. The days waiting for the county's decision crawled by like wounded animals. Clara threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that barely needed it, cooking elaborate meals that nobody had the appetite to eat. The children were quieter than usual, even Ryder, like they were all holding their breath. Elias worked himself nearly to death. He was out before dawn and didn't come back until after dark, driving himself and the ranch hands he'd hired on credit he couldn't afford. When Clara tried to talk to him about it, he just shook his head. If we lose the kids because of money, at least I'll know I tried everything, he said. That was the end of that conversation. The letter came on a Thursday. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the official county wagon coming up the road, dust trailing behind it like a warning. Her hands went still on the shirt she was pinning to the line. Margaret Whitmore climbed down from the wagon wearing the same severe expression she'd had during the inspection. She carried a leather folder under one arm. Mrs. Vance, she said, and Clara realized it was the first time someone had called her that. The name still felt borrowed, like clothing that didn't quite fit. Mrs. Whitmore, I have the board's decision. Margaret opened her folder, pulled out an official-looking document. After reviewing my report and considering the recent marriage, the board has decided to allow the children to remain in your custody. Provisionally. Clara's knees went weak with relief. Provisionally? We'll conduct follow-up visits every 3 months for the next year. If at any point we find the situation has deteriorated, inadequate food, unsafe conditions, signs of neglect, we'll revisit the placement decision. Margaret's eyes were hard. The marriage helped your case, Mrs. Vance, but marriages of convenience have a way of falling apart under pressure. If yours does, those children will pay the price. It won't fall apart. We'll see. Margaret tucked the document back into her folder. The children are fortunate to have advocates. Sheriff Porter spoke quite highly of your efforts, as did several townspeople. That carried weight with the board. Clara blinked. Who? The widow Fletcher mentioned your help with her household. Mrs. Patterson noted your reliable character. Even Mr. Stevens, who filed the original complaint, admitted upon further questioning that he had no direct evidence of neglect, just concerns about propriety. Margaret's mouth thinned. Concerns which, I might add, seemed more rooted in gossip than genuine care for the children's welfare. So Bradley Stevens had reported them. Clara had suspected, but having it confirmed made her jaw clench. Tell your husband the board expects to see financial stability by the next inspection, Margaret continued. A ranch on the verge of foreclosure is not an adequate environment for children, marriage or no marriage. She left before Clara could respond, her wagon kicking up dust as it headed back toward town. Clara stood in the yard holding a damp shirt, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. For now. The children could stay. But the victory felt hollow with that 3-month deadline hanging over them and the bank still circling like buzzards. She found Elias in the barn, repairing a broken stall door. The county decided, she said without preamble, His hands went still on the hammer. And? The kids can stay. 3-month provisional period. They'll check back then. Elias set down the hammer carefully, like he didn't trust his hands. That's good. That's... His voice cracked. He turned away, shoulders shaking once before he pulled himself together. That's real good. Clara wanted to say something comforting, wanted to tell him it would all work out, that the worst was behind them. But the bank notice was still there, and 3 months wasn't much time to come up with $800 they didn't have. We need to talk about the money, she said. I know. Elias, I said I know. He picked up the hammer again, drove a nail with more force than necessary. I'm working on it. Working on it how? I've got a buyer lined up for half the herd. Won't bring in 800, but it's a start. And I'm talking to some men about leasing the north pasture. Between that and what you've been bringing in from town work, he stopped, shook his head. It's still not enough. But it's something. Clara thought about her jar upstairs. $23 that had taken weeks of brutal work to accumulate, a drop in an ocean of debt. There has to be another way, she said. If there is, I haven't found it. Elias set down the hammer, finally turned to look at her. But we've got 3 months before the county comes back, and 2 months before the bank takes the ranch. So we keep trying. What else can we do? That night at dinner, Clara told the children about the county's decision. The relief was immediate and visible. Lily started crying. Jonah grabbed his sister's hand. Even Cole's rigid shoulders relaxed slightly. So we get to stay? Ryder asked, his voice suspicious, like he was waiting for the catch. You get to stay, Clara confirmed. All of us? Together? All of you. Together. For the first time since Clara had arrived, Ryder smiled. It was small and quickly hidden, but it was there. After the children went to bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, trying to make numbers work that refused to cooperate. Elias's cattle sale would bring in maybe $300. The pasture lease, if it went through, another $100. Her town work, if she tripled her current pace, might add $50 over 2 months. That was $450 total. Still, $350 short. Stop doing that, Elias said from the doorway. Clara looked up. Doing what? Trying to solve problems that don't have solutions. He crossed to the table, looked at her calculations. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this isn't your burden to carry. Yes, it is. I married you, didn't I? That makes it my burden, too. Something flickered in Elias's eyes. You married me to save the kids, not to inherit my debts. Well, I got both, so I might as well try to do something about it. Elias pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. You know what the worst part is? Sarah and I built this place from nothing, spent 15 years turning dust and stubbornness into something real, something that could last. His voice went rough. And I'm going to lose it in 15 months. Everything she worked for, everything she wanted for our kids. Just gone. Clara set down her pencil. Tell me about her, about Sarah. Elias looked surprised. Why? Because the children loved her. Because this was her house before it was mine. Because I'm wearing a dress she started making. Clara touched the blue fabric. I should know who she was. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. She was strong, not loud strong, but steady strong. The kind of person who could face down anything without flinching. She never complained, even when things got hard. Never gave up on anything she decided was worth fighting for. Sounds remarkable. She was. Elias stared into his cup. She made this place home. I built the structures, but she made it mean something. The garden, the cooking, the way she raised the kids, all of it was her. When she died, it was like someone ripped out the foundation and expected the building to stay standing anyway. Clara thought about the photographs on the mantel, about the woman with the strong features and clear eyes who'd left such enormous shoes to fill. I can't be her, Clara said quietly. I know. I'm not asking you to be. Then what are you asking? Elias looked up, met her eyes. Just to stay, that's all. However this ends, with the ranch or without it, with money or without it, just stay. The kids need that. They need someone who won't leave. Clara thought about Daniel, who'd died and left her, about her father, who'd sold her, about every person who'd looked at her and found her wanting. And she thought about 5 children upstairs who were just starting to trust that she might actually be different. I'm staying, she said. I already told you that. I know, but I needed to hear it again. They sat in the quiet kitchen while the lamp burned low, and outside the night sounds settled into familiar rhythms. It wasn't romantic, wasn't even particularly comfortable, but it was honest, and Clara was learning that honest was the only thing worth building on. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Clara took on every job she could find in town: washing, mending, cleaning, cooking for families who could afford to hire help. She worked until her hands bled and her back screamed. Elias sold the cattle, leased the pasture, took on side work fixing wagons and shoeing horses for anyone who'd pay. The children pitched in too. Cole and Ryder hired themselves out for odd jobs. Silas sold vegetables from the garden. Even the twins went door to door selling eggs. The money accumulated slowly. $400, $500, $550. Clara kept it all in a tin box under the floorboard in their bedroom, counting it every night like a ritual. "We're not going to make it," Elias said one evening, 2 weeks before the bank deadline. They had $630, 170 short. "We might." We might. She said it fiercely, refusing to accept defeat. "We've come this far, we're not giving up now." But privately, she was starting to think Elias was right. $170 might as well be $1,000. They'd wrung every penny they could from every available source. There was nothing left to sell, no more work to take on, no miracle waiting in the wings. On a Sunday afternoon with 9 days left before the bank took everything, Clara went to church for the first time since arriving at the ranch. She wasn't particularly religious, her faith had died along with Daniel, but she needed somewhere to think, and the empty church offered that. She sat in a back pew and stared at the plain altar, trying to figure out what she'd missed. Some solution she'd overlooked, some angle she hadn't considered. "Thought I might find you here." Clara turned to see Sheriff Porter walking up the aisle. "Not much of a churchgoer," she said. "Me neither." He settled into the pew beside her. "But it's quiet. Good place to think." They sat in silence for a moment. "I heard about the bank situation," Porter said finally. "Word gets around." "I'm sure it does. Folks are talking. Some think Elias should just cut his losses. Others think he's a fool for trying to hold on." Porter pulled out his whittling knife, turned a piece of wood over in his hands. "Me? I think he's brave. Stubborn as hell, but brave." Clara smiled slightly. "Stubbornness seems to be a family trait. Must be if you married into it." Porter started whittling, the knife making soft, scraping sounds. "You know, Sarah used to sit right here when things got hard. She'd come in, sit in this exact pew, and just think. Usually came out with some kind of plan. I don't have a plan. I've been trying to find one for weeks." "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places." Clara turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "Sarah taught me something once. She said when you can't find the solution inside yourself, sometimes you have to ask for help from places you'd rather not." He paused his whittling. "There's a cattlemen's association in Denver. They have an emergency fund for ranchers in trouble. Sarah knew about it. She actually helped get it started years ago. But Elias, being Elias, would never ask. Too proud." Clara's heart started beating faster. "How much do they loan?" "Depends on the situation, but I've seen them go as high as $300, $400, with reasonable terms for paying it back." $300. It could be enough. It could actually be enough. "How do I apply?" Clara asked. Porter smiled. "You'd have to go to Denver, present your case to the board. They meet every Monday." He pulled out his pocket watch. "Next meeting's in 6 days." 6 days. 3 days before the bank deadline. Clara stood. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet. They're not easy to convince. You'll need documentation, proof of the ranch's value, evidence you can repay, and you'll need someone to vouch for you." He stood too. "Lucky for you, I'm planning a trip to Denver next week anyway. Could use the company." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you helping us?" Porter's face softened. "Because Sarah was good people. And because you're turning out to be good people too. And because those kids deserve a fighting chance." He pocketed his whittling. "Plus, I'm tired of watching bullies like the bank grind down folks who are trying their best. Sometimes you have to push back." Clara made the trip to Denver with Sheriff Porter, leaving before dawn on a Tuesday and arriving late that evening. The city felt enormous after months in the valley, all noise and people and buildings that blocked out the sky. She stayed in a boarding house that night, barely sleeping, going over her prepared speech again and again. The Cattlemen's Association met in a wood-paneled office that smelled like cigars and old money. 5 men sat behind a long table, looking at Clara with expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. She presented her case simply. The ranch's value, the improvements Elias had made, the recent hardships, Sarah's death, the mounting debt, the struggle to keep going. She showed them the $630 they'd managed to save, showed them the work records from town, the lease agreement for the pasture, the cattle sale receipts, everything that proved they were trying. Mrs. Vance, one of the men said when she finished. He was older, with white hair and cold eyes. Your situation is unfortunate, but we're not a charity. We loan to viable operations with clear paths to profitability. Your ranch is, forgive my bluntness, a sinking ship. Maybe, Clara said, but it's a ship worth saving. Based on what? Sentiment? Hope? Based on 15 years of hard work? Based on 5 children who need a home? Based on the fact that good people shouldn't lose everything just because life dealt them a hard hand? The men exchanged glances. Clara could see the dismissal forming, could see them preparing to send her away with polite regrets and empty promises to consider her case. Sheriff Porter stood from where he'd been sitting in the back. Gentlemen, if I may, the white-haired man sighed. Sheriff Porter, we wondered when you'd speak up. Sarah Vance helped found this association, Porter said. She fought to create the emergency fund because she believed ranchers should help each other, that we're stronger together than apart. She'd be ashamed to see you turn away her family over cold accounting. The fund has rules. The fund has discretion. You've bent the rules before for people with half the merit Clara's presented here. Porter's voice went hard. This is Sarah Vance's ranch, her children, her legacy. If you can't find it in yourselves to help, then this fund isn't worth the paper it's written on. Silence fell across the room. The white-haired man stared at Porter, then at Clara. $300. 5-year repayment terms at 4% interest. Miss one payment, the whole loan comes due immediately. Take it or leave it. Clara's hands trembled. I'll take it. She rode back to the ranch with Sheriff Porter and a bank draft for $300, arriving 2 days before the deadline. Elias was in the barn when she got there, and the look on his face when she showed him the draft was something Clara would remember for the rest of her life. Where did you? He couldn't seem to finish a sentence. Cattlemen's Association Emergency Fund. Sheriff Porter helped. Clara pressed the draft into his hands. Combined with what we saved, it's enough. Barely, but enough. Elias stared at the paper like it might disappear. Then he looked at Clara and she saw tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face. You saved us, he said hoarsely. You actually saved us. We saved us. All of us together. He pulled her into his arms then, sudden and fierce, and Clara felt the last wall between them crumble. They stood in the barn holding each other while the horses stamped and the chickens clucked and the ordinary sounds of the ranch went on around them. When they finally pulled apart, Elias kept his hands on her shoulders. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. This is my home too now, my family. Something shifted in his expression. Clara, I need to tell you something. This marriage, it started as paperwork, a solution to a problem, but somewhere along the way, it became... He stopped, struggling with words. You became important, not just for the kids, for me. And I don't know when that happened, but it did. Clara's breath caught. Elias, I'm not asking you to love me. I know I'm not much of a prize, but I wanted you to know. You're not just my wife on paper anymore. You're my partner, He paused. My friend. And maybe someday if you ever felt... Clara kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. She just stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his awkward, wonderful stumbling towards something neither of them had planned on. When she pulled back, Elias was staring at her with wonder. I already feel it, Clara said quietly. I've been feeling it for weeks. I was just waiting for you to catch up. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. Then he kissed her back, properly this time, and Clara felt something long frozen in her chest finally begin to thaw. They paid the bank the next day. Clara, Elias, and all 5 children rode into town together in the wagon, the money tin sitting between them like treasure. The banker counted out every dollar with the enthusiasm of a man watching his prey escape, but the numbers were right. $800 exactly. Paid in full, the banker said sourly, stamping the receipt. Elias folded the receipt carefully and tucked it in his pocket. Then he ushered his family out of the bank and into the sunlight. Ice cream, he announced. The children stared at him. What? We just saved the ranch. We're getting ice cream. He looked at Clara. Unless you have objections. Clara smiled. No objections at all. They went to the general store where Mrs. Patterson served them ice cream with an expression that was almost friendly. The children ate like they'd never tasted anything so good, and maybe they hadn't. Maybe victory tasted sweeter than anything else. Afterward, they walked down the main street of Dustridge together, a family in every way that mattered. People stared. Clara felt the weight of their eyes, the whispers that followed. But she didn't care anymore. Let them talk. Let them judge. She knew what she'd built here, what she'd fought for. And it was real. That night, lying in bed beside Elias in the darkness, Clara thought about how far she'd come. From an auction platform worth $1 to this, a marriage that had become real, a family that had become hers, a home worth fighting for. You still awake? Elias asked. Yeah. What are you thinking about? Clara considered. About how the world tried to throw me away, and how I found a place anyway. Elias's hand found hers under the covers, laced their fingers together. The world's a fool then, because you're worth a hell of a lot more than $1. Clara squeezed his hand. Took you long enough to figure that out. Yeah, well, I'm slow, but I get there eventually. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the house settle around them. Somewhere above, a child turned over in sleep. The wind rattled the shutters Clara had finally fixed last week. Bessie lowed softly in the barn. The sounds of home. The county inspector came back 3 months later for her follow-up visit. Clara watched from the porch as Margaret Whitmore's wagon approached, but she didn't feel the fear she had last time. She'd earned her place here. They all had. Margaret went through the house with the same critical eye, but there was less to criticize this time. The children were healthy, well-fed, properly clothed. The house was clean and maintained. The garden flourished under Silas's careful tending. And the marriage certificate was filed, legal, real. I see improvements, Margaret admitted grudgingly. The financial situation has stabilized? The ranch is paid up through next year, Clara said. We're managing. And the children? Are they adjusting to the new family structure? As if on cue, Lily ran up and grabbed Clara's hand. Can we make cookies today? The kind with the cinnamon? Clara smiled down at her. After your lessons, go wash up for lunch. Lily ran off, and Margaret made a note. She seems comfortable with you. We're comfortable with each other, all of us. Margaret closed her notebook. I'll recommend continued placement with no further inspections required. Barring any complaints or incidents, the provisional status will be lifted. She paused. You've done well, Mrs. Vance. Better than I expected. It was the closest thing to approval Clara would get from her, and that was fine. She didn't need Margaret's approval anymore. After the inspector left, Clara found Elias in the barn and told him the news. He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. We did it, he said. We actually did it. Yeah, we did. Years passed. The ranch thrived under their joint stewardship. Elias handling the cattle and land, Clara managing the house and books. The children grew. Cole became the steady presence his father needed, eventually taking over more of the daily operations. Ryder's anger mellowed into passion, channeled into breeding better stock and improving their herd. Silas never became particularly talkative, but he didn't need to be. His hands in the garden spoke volumes, and the twins grew into themselves. Jonah quiet but clever, Lily bold and bright. Clara's town work eventually became a small business. Other ranchers' wives hired her to handle their books, to teach their children, to help manage households. The money wasn't much, but it was steady, and it was hers. On a spring evening when the valley was green with new grass and the mountains still wore caps of snow, Clara stood at the edge of the garden and looked out over everything they'd built. The house stood solid, repairs made and maintained. The barn had a new roof. The fences were mended. The cattle grazed fat and healthy in the distance. Elias came up beside her, slipped an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that auction platform. About being sold for $1. That was a long time ago." "I know, but sometimes I still think about it. About how close I came to just disappearing, becoming nothing." Elias turned her to face him. "You were never nothing. The world just didn't know how to measure your worth." Clara looked at this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd started as her employer and become her partner, her friend, her love. "And you did?" "No. I just knew I needed help and you needed a place. The rest," he smiled, "the rest we figured out as we went." "That's the thing about worth, isn't it?" Clara said thoughtfully. "It's not something someone can give you or take away. It's not in a price tag or a bank account or what people say about you." She touched his face. "It's in what you build, who you love, how you show up when things get hard." "Sounds like something Sarah would have said." Clara smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just something I learned by living it." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, the children were starting dinner. Clara could hear Cole giving orders, Ryder complaining, Silas moving quietly through tasks, the twins laughing about something. The sounds of family, of home, of a life built one choice at a time. Clara had been sold for $1 on a platform in the dust, branded as worthless by every standard that was supposed to matter. And now here she stood, on land that was hers, with a family that was hers, having built something that couldn't be measured in dollars or defined by other people's judgments. She'd learned that worth wasn't something you were given. It was something you proved day by day through the simple act of staying, of trying, of refusing to let the world's verdict be the final word. On quiet evenings like this, Clara would sit on the porch with Elias and watch the stars come out over the valley. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Either way, it was enough. Because she'd found what everyone spends their whole lives searching for, a place where she belonged. Not because someone assigned it to her, not because papers said so, but because she'd earned it, built it, fought for it. And that, Clara knew, was worth more than any price the world could name. The ranch thrived, the children grew, the garden bloomed every spring, and the woman who'd once stood on an auction platform worth $1 became the foundation of something that would outlast them all. Not because she was perfect, not because it was easy, but because when given the choice between running and staying, between giving up and fighting, between accepting the world's verdict and writing her own story, she stayed. She fought. She won. And in the end, that made all the difference.